All right, I want to show you guys something real quick. With text layers and model layers, just as you can trace the canvas or a raster layer, text layer, or model layer to a paths layer, you can also directly convert a text layer or a model layer into a raster layer to be able to use all of the raster editing functions. So for instance, this text layer that we created earlier, let's see, text layer. This is our editable text layer. We can click edit text and modify this however we want. Let's do something like this. There we go. Sun, heart, sun. That's fun. All right, so we can't, when we're in text editing mode, we can only change font and size. We can't do any of the raster editing functions, so we can just go copy to raster layer. So this works with text layers and model layers. So we will copy to raster layer, and then we will hide the text layer, and now we have a raster layer that's just the same as what our text layer was. So we can select that, edit raster. So these editing functions, we could use them on any of these other layers that we just generated. I'm going to show you guys some of them on this layer that we just generated from a text layer. Let's see, so we go into editing mode, and in the manual brush editing function, you get to physically draw on the canvas using the same brush parameters that you would use when doing a stroke paths. We can set the diameter, brush profile shape, brush value, which is the height of the brush basically. And now we also have some blend modes here, different things for the brush to do to the raster layer. And we also have some dynamics going on here. So we have a size decay and a value decay. We also have an inertia and a brush quality. The brush quality affects basically the resolution of the brush stroke itself. So you can max this out. If you have a really beefy computer, you can max this out and you will get the best possible quality brush strokes. So let's see, if I sharpen this up, we get a pretty good brush stroke going on there. But if I reduce down, let's go all the way down, reduce the brush quality, now you can see it's really pixely. The reason for that is so that on slower computers, there's not an issue of lag editing a raster layer, because some machines, for instance, like a netbook, dual core, not very fast, you can sacrifice a little bit of quality. This defaults to 50% quality or half quality there, and it's generally not noticeable. It depends on your canvas's resolution once again. So let's see, the dynamics that we have here, the fun one is brush inertia. So if you're happy with whatever you're drawing strokes with, whether it's a graphics tablet or a mouse or a trackball, maybe you don't need any brush inertia. But what this enables you to do is effectively smooth out your brush strokes. So we'll set that actually at 50%. And if you watch, now the brush sort of lags behind, and the resulting brush stroke is smoother in its form. If we increase that all the way, now you can see the brush really lags behind the cursor. And so we can really get some, I don't know, write some cursive on here. That's what that's there for. It's basically a smooth stroke operation. And now the decay values, you turn these down, the brush size, the thickness of the stroke, and the height of the stroke will not change. If we increase size decay, that means that the height won't change, but the radius will, or the diameter of the brush. If we increase the value decay, that will make it ramp down. And it's a little funky all by itself, especially with a squared up brush like this. We'll smooth it out, and you can see it's ramping down. Now these decays aren't a function of time, they're a function of length. So if I just sit in one spot, the value is not going to go down very much, but as I move away, it'll start ramping down. So it's always consistent whether you're drawing a brush stroke fast or drawing a brush stroke slow. Okay, and then of course we have the different brush modes. So that was additive. You can see that if I keep layering strokes, they'll keep getting higher and higher. But sometimes you might want to be removing some of a raster layer, kind of lowering things down like this. And there's also a maximum blend mode, which means that anything that is lower than the brush will be replaced with the stroke. So you can see here that the maximum blending mode is the same thing as with the layer blending modes, where maximum just means use the higher of the two. So if what's already there in the raster layer is higher than the brush stroke, use what's already there. Otherwise, use the brush stroke. We also have a new smooth brush, which is the same as the blur tool in Photoshop or other graphics editing programs. And we can just go in there now and smooth everything out. The brush value when using the smoothing brush mode dictates the radius of the blur. And then the actual brush shape also dictates the radius of the blur within the brush's profile. So let's see. So with the brush stroke we have right now, the brush profile we have right now, the very center of our brush is going to create the maximum blur, while the blur falls off, is feathered at the edges because of the brush profile here. My favorite one is the smudge. So this actually has two modes. This little option pops up here, blurred smudge. When this is disabled, the smudge tool is more of a displacement. So it just directly shifts everything in the direction of the stroke. You can see that I can push all this out and it's not becoming blurrier. It's just staying the same sharpness, it's just shifted. If we enable blurred smudge, this will actually spread what you're applying a brush stroke to across the stroke itself. So the more we do this, you can see that this has become more ramped. It's not as sharp of a transition now. Go back and forth. So you can see it's become very rounded now. And if we undo that, you can see it sharpens back up. So yeah, those are the manual brush editing features and functions. Let's move on to adjust levels. This is a really handy one to have. This one lets you effectively remap all of the heights across the raster layer to new ones. So let's say I want to invert the layer. Well, I can raise the bottom up, raise the lowest levels up, and pull down the highest values. I can also do stuff like this. I can have the lowest and the highest be the highest, and then the middle be the lowest. And we can create all kinds of cool shapes just messing around with this. You can take a chamfered shape, for instance. So because it's a ramped shape, we can start creating all kinds of really cool profiles and geometry with this. And there are other waveforms. These are applied between each of these XY graph points. So you just click and add a point, and you can see we're getting more of a rounded effect in there. Smooth step, we have quadratic and cubic curve. And once you're happy with what you have, you just hit apply, and there's your layer. And another editing function is the expand contract. This one's pretty self-explanatory. You adjust the horizontal radius, which is effectively, you can think of it as like expanding a sphere where the very top of the sphere is aligned with that point in the raster layer. So when it's at 0, you can imagine the layer is made up of a bunch of little tiny 0 radius spheres, and we're expanding those spheres. If you want the surface of your layer to represent the center of the expanding sphere, you enable expand vertically. So now the entire layer is being expanded as though every point on it is a little sphere expanding. You can also go negative and shrink it down. The thing with expand vertically is that it makes it's a little unwieldy because you can see that everything's moving up and down, which is why this default is being disabled. That way you can inflate and deflate without everything moving up and down on you. You can keep everything within your existing layers, Z, height, and depth. The Z radius is to create more of a cylindrical expansion. So if we disable lock Z radius to the horizontal radius, now we can independently change our vertical radius. If we set that to 0, you can see that we're just expanding horizontally now, more of a circular or cylindrical expansion. So that opens up a lot of possibilities as far as what sort of shapes you can produce. Let's see, the Z radius is also limited to the absolute value of your horizontal expansion radius. And you can see here that everything's very low resolution. That is strictly just to make the live updating faster. Once you hit apply, you can see everything's a lot smoother now. All right, we're gonna undo that. Let's check out draft angle. So you can see we have these steep sides on our shape right here. Let's say we're gonna be using a tapered cutter of some kind, and we're not going to be able to cut those. Most of the tool paths will automatically generate accommodating for that geometry, and it'll know that, oh, this tapered cutter can't cut down in this little edge right here. And so it'll generate a cut path that ramps out according to your tool's geometry. But you can directly create a draft angle here. And again, don't mind the low resolution, it's just for the live updating. You can see we can go all the way up to a 45-degree angle here, from a 1 degree to a 45. We will do, let's say, a 30 degree. Let's say we have a 30-degree tapered cutter. Apply. There. Now everything has a nice draft angle to it. And then the last two raster editing functions that we have are the tiling functions. We have column row tiling, which enables us to turn our layer into a pattern of itself. And you can see that we can change the number of columns and rows that we're repeating it. So we can do a 2 by 2. So you can see here, this area is our original layer, and we've repeated it in 2 columns and 2 rows. And you can also apply a gap there. So 100% means basically the whole layer becomes a gap. 50% puts a gap in there that's equal to the size of each column. And same thing with the y-axis gap. 50% makes the height of the gap equal to the height of each new cell that the raster layer is being copied into. We will reduce that down, hit apply. So now we have this 2 by 2 duplicate of our layer. And then circular tiling. Let's reduce that radius down. With the circular tiling, the radius that is indicated here is the radius from the middle of your circle to the center line, the y-axis center line of your raster layer. If we increase or decrease the number of repetitions, you can see that it's always centered around that radius. From the center to, what are we at, 2 1/4 inches right here. You can see that's right on the 1 inch, 2 inch, and 1/4. It's always gonna be just that center line radius. And we can change the scale of the individual repetitions and do a rotational offset. Let's see, let's do 5 repetitions, full scale, apply. And all of these functions, they apply to the layer at the canvas's resolution. You can actually go in, increase your canvas's resolution, do these editing functions, and then lower your canvas's resolution before you go in and start generating toolpaths. Okay, the last function I want to show you guys is the along paths function. And this function enables you to conform either a text layer or a raster layer to a path, along a path, or between pairs of paths. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a paths layer and draw some simple paths here. Let's see, edit paths. Okay, we get out of edit mode. The paths layer that you are going to be applying your text or raster layer along must be below the text layer or the raster layer. So we select our text layer, and you can see right here it says text along paths. When you have a raster layer selected, this will just say raster along paths. So we can click that, and right away you can see that there's a little bit of a preview going on here. So each path gets a copy of the text or raster layer conformed along it. We can adjust the scale here. Now this fractional value is in terms of the scale of the original layer itself. So we have our text layer right here. It is, let's see, 10 inches, almost 11 inches. So this scale factor is in terms of that 11 inches. We can also have the layer repeat by enabling repeat layer right here. So we activate that. Now when we scale it down, we can see that we have multiple repetitions of the text layer along each path. If you want to have a specific number of repetitions, you can enable scale by repetitions right here. So instead of a scale factor, now we just have a number of times to duplicate the layer. And if we do a position offset, we can actually get it so that it starts at the beginning of the path, and then we have our 2 repetitions along the paths. So these paths are pretty much the same size, but if one was longer than the other, then 2 repetitions across that layer would mean that the text layer is repeated larger to fit the length of that path. We can also, let's see, we can do our lateral offset. So we'll center that. Let's see, we can also do a fixed angle displacement. So this allows us to do more of like a ribbon effect. You can set the angle that it's displacing instead of the displacement following perpendicular to the actual paths themselves. And we can also space out the individual duplicates. So if we, let's see, we'll turn off scale by repetitions, scale this down. So you can use the repeat spacing to make sure there's a little bit of a gap in there. Now you can see some artifacting that's going on here while I adjust this. That's not actually going to be there when we actually generate. So we'll hit generate, and you can see that we've created a new raster layer above our text layer right here that we can click on. Let's hide our paths in our text layer. So there, right there is a simple along paths. Now another thing I want to show you is if we put our text and paths layer back, we can go text along paths. We can also do a double path along paths, where now it uses every 2 paths to generate an along paths between those rails. So now things like lateral offset, these no longer have any effect because it's just staying between the paths. And we can still do a position offset along the paths. Let's see, we can also do scale repetitions with the double path. And let's see, turn off repeat layer. Let's put this down to 1 repetition. Well, actually, let's go like this. I want to fit it in there to certain, get a little bit centered like this. So we can hit generate. And there's our new text along paths right there between 2 paths. We can also have it conform the text or raster layer along the paths, along the layer's other axis. So right now we're having it go along the x-axis of our text layer. That's being conformed to the paths. We can click right here, layer axis to y-axis, and now our text layer is being mapped to the paths from top to bottom. And we can scale by repetitions, repeat layer. So now we could have something like that. If we turn on double paths mode, same situation as before with the when we had x-axis, but now we have it along our y-axis. And we can space them out a bit. There. So yeah, pretty simple function, very powerful, great for doing things like flowing banners, text. And again, this also works with raster layers. So if I move our paths layer underneath, it'll all work the same with the raster layers as well. So now right here you can see it says a raster along paths. And this is one that we already did our text along this path, created the raster layer. Now we can do that raster layer again along the paths. We'll do x-axis, we will do double mode, and we will get this looking even more deformed. There, so now we created a new raster layer from that existing raster layer. Here's the new one we just made. So yeah, great function, easy to use. Just make sure you have your paths beneath the raster text layer that you want to apply it to. And that's it. All right, thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope it helps you guys create all kinds of cool things in PixelCNC. I've really been waiting a while to see what you guys come up with. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.